Are ghosts real? Several recent encounters suggest there might be more things in heaven and earth than we can dream of.
So are werewolves just a Hollywood creation, or do half-man, half-wolf creatures really exist? Now, tonight, we kick off our Conspiracy Theory Month series, which was a...
The legend of the vampire actually goes back for centuries, and it exists in some form or another in almost every culture. In fact, some people believe the first vampire story was in the Bible.
Well, for decades, only crackpots and crazy people believed in UFOs. That's what I thought anyway. And then in recent years, it turns out that governments have been taking them seriously all along.
Try and clear up an ancient mystery with the help of a prominent veterinarian who says she can prove that Bigfoot exists and that he's related to all of us.
New reports, 5 pilots coming forward over the weekend saying they've had multiple mid-air encounters with high-flying, fast-moving objects.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of Celestial Oddities PairOfNormal Guys podcast. I am Frater Crow.
And I'm your co-host this evening, Daniel James.
We're certainly happy to have you listening in this evening. If you are new to the show, thank you so much for tuning in. If you are a return listener, thank you so much for coming back. We always try to bring you the best in paranormal and supernatural, and tonight will be no different. We do air to you every other week, 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that is across all channels from iTunes to iHeartRadio, Spotify, Deezer, Spreaker, CastBox, you name it. We are on it, so listen where you feel most comfortable. But the more that you click the like, share, and follow buttons, more that it moves us up the podcast community rankings, more people that discover the show, keeps you in the loop as new episodes air, and gives you unfiltered access to our past archives. There's something for absolutely everyone. This is episode 7 of season 2, Dan. How crazy is that already?
Time flies, man. Time is an illusion.
It is kind of an illusion. It feels like that this season. I mean, last season, I guess when you look back on it, it seemed like we did quite a lot of episodes, but it didn't, in hindsight, it's like, wow, we did that many. But to think it's already episode 7, it seems like we just started the other night.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, we start, just going through it and doing it and doing it and doing it. You lose track of, like, the achievements and the progress, and it's becomes something that is perpetual, but you don't really notice how big it is,
You don't. And honestly, we've talked about so many things, too. And it's like there's been so many great conversations and topics. To think back on it, it's a blur, but each one individually is awesome. If you are new to our show, folks, we deep dive into subject matter of the supernatural and paranormal, from ghosts and cryptids, aliens, visitations, to metaphysical topics, to just strange unsolved mysteries and everything in between. Not only from a talk show platform, we do bring guests on and interview them and pick their brains that are, in the scene themselves. And we also do listener calls where someone who is a listener of ours can call in and explain their experiences, and Daniel and I will talk about our theories and thoughts of what might have happened during that situation. So thank you so much to everyone listening out there and supporting us to allow us to be able to do these things. Hello to everyone out there tuning in our chat stream that we have going on. As I said, we do tune in from all different kinds of stations out there, but our hosting company is Spreaker, and that is Spreaker. You can check them out at Spreaker.com or on the app market with Spreaker app. If you do that, not only will that allow you to listen to the show, but the extra bonus with that is you can chat with us during the show through an instant messenger feature. Ask questions, give us feedback or thoughts on the show, and we always love when people tune into the show and obviously interact with us during the show.
One thing I'm really loving is we are having more of an interactive experience on this season. So we're getting more people involved. It's a little bit more hands-on and collaborative with our audience, and it's a lot of fun. I just want to say hey to the chat and everybody listening. And then one little note as well. I'm going to say this as often as I can. We have some awesome episodes. And if you guys go to our Spreaker website, to the Celestial Oddities page, you can actually browse through the taglines and the headers for all of our previous episodes and listen to that really old content that's got a lot of value in it. And check out, see what we have, and you can also use the type of topics that we discuss as somewhere to start in terms of providing suggestions for more episodes. We always take suggestions on what you guys want to hear us talk about. We're very collaborative, so go to our Spreaker page, check out some of our previous content, and that's what I got to say.
No, I certainly agree with that, folks. Jump in there, tune in with us, give us feedback, give us ideas and thoughts. We love to hear from you guys and girls out there of what it is that you want to hear us talk about. A lot of times it's things we might have a little bit of knowledge on and we research and learn more. Sometimes we might already be pretty versed in it, and then other times you guys suggest things that we've never heard of before at all, and I start to look into it and I'm like, where the hell did they come across this at? So it's always fascinating to learn new things ourselves. We are knowledge junkies. We love the unexplained. So when we learn about something new, it's a thrill for us as it is for you guys to listen to us deep dive into it. And talking about deep diving, tonight's episode's kind of interesting, and I put this in the description. I says we're going to do a deep dive into Organism 46B, no pun intended, because it does have to do with actual scuba diving. So I'll tell you a little bit about what Organism 46B is, how it came about, the knowledge that we have on it. Daniel will then jump in and explain his thoughts of what he feels this creature is, and then we'll kind of go back and forth off of that. If you are new to this creature, Organism 46B is an enormous 33-foot long, 14-tentacled squid-like creature which lived in Lake Vostok. And that's a subglacial lake located under 2 miles of ice beneath Vostok Station in the Antarctic. Now, I want to say that the Soviets and the Russians, they were digging for almost 30 years in this ice to try to reach the actual water. I want you to picture this, folks. This is a massive, massive lake of water. This water, though, is unique for the fact that it has not seen surface air of the Earth in millions and millions of years. It has been under 2 miles, and that's mind-boggling in itself to think about. I mean, think about the distance of a mile if you walk it. Imagine that being solid ice. Now, double that. That is how far down it is under the Earth's surface, or under the surface of this ice. Hasn't been disturbed or touched by any type of air or any type of creature in millions of years. Now, one would think, well, how could anything live down there? But that is the fascinating thing about this story, is that not only do things live down there, they have discovered 3,500 different species of organisms down there. So it's really a gold mine of unexplained creatures, organisms, and life that until this discovery happened, no one knew even existed. It is in a very remote area of the Arctic and not able to be reached easily. As I said, it took 30 years of drilling to get down there, and they had to be very, very careful when drilling that they didn't contaminate the water with the drill bits, with any of their equipment, so they had to take it very slow. Now, what is very interesting about this is when they officially got to the waterbed, they sent 8 scientific explorers down who were also divers that worked on this project, and on day 1, they discovered this, what they called Organism 46B. It was a massive octopus-like creature. In the description I just read you from fandom.com, it said a squid-like creature, but from the depictions shown and talked about, it actually looked more like an octopus. But what makes it interesting, octopus are known to have 8 tentacles, therefore they're called octopus, and it stands for 8, octagon. But what's interesting about this is it has 14. No one's ever seen a 14-tentacled, octopus before. What is very interesting about this is, it kind of brings you to like a horror movie-esque type feel, that they seen this creature in the water, and, first take a step back. There is no light down there. Light hasn't penetrated this sea body in quite a long time, because so thick of ice that you're not seeing anything down there but darkness. So imagine being 2 miles under Earth, under ice, in a body of water with 3,500 creatures that you know nothing about, shining a light with 7 of your comrades, and all of a sudden you see a 33-foot octopus-like creature. And the first scientist to encounter it didn't swim away from it. He kind of engaged it, sat there in the water for a minute, or swam there in the water, and it instantly paralyzed him with its poison. It has a toxin that it spits out to immobilize and paralyze its prey, which some forms of octopus do have. But what is interesting about this specific one is the fact that it has a reach of 150 feet. So when it shoots out this toxin, instantly anything within 150 feet of it becomes paralyzed. Then it attacks with its tentacles and its massively sharp beak-like teeth. It paralyzed the scientist and then bit his head off, and killed him instantly. Then a second one was actually killed as well. So it's pretty interesting that the first encounter, day one of finally breaking through the ice and encountering these creatures, 2 of the 8 were murdered by this creature, but they were able to capture it in some type of specimen tank by one of the scientists, the only female on the team, kind of making herself bait. And she was a very known athlete in Russia. She swam very quickly away from this thing, and it led it into a trap. It led it into a specimen tank, and they captured it. Now, here's where things get pretty wild. Once they captured it, they brought it to the surface. Once they brought it to the surface, instantly, as soon as they got there, the Soviets confiscated the animal, shut down the research program, capped off the tunnel that they've been digging for 30 years and blocked it off with a plug, and took this creature. It went back to Russia, where it is said, and this was all hidden in top secret documents until one of the remaining 6 that were still living defected and left Russia, and then started to talk about the experiments that he was on, started to leak the knowledge of the 2 scientist comrades that were killed. And he said that this was sent back to Russia for Vladimir Putin to use to extract this extremely, extremely deadly toxin to make into a bioweapon to use for possible upcoming war. So that is a kind of deep dive history of what it is we're talking about as far as this specific animal or alien or whatever you want to call it that they named Organism 46b, how they got to it, and just the sheer craziness of the fact of 2 miles under the ice, pure darkness, 3,500 species of organisms, and the encounters that they faced on day 1. So, Dan, what do you think?
It's pretty fun. These sort of one-off creature features are interesting because I don't believe that there's any one source or any one answer as to far as where they come from and how they sort of, bleed into our reality. And it's so fun seeing with the colorful variety of all of these creatures that pop up in stories like this. It seems like we're almost dealing with like a type of like Cthulhu or something, right? Whenever we talk about these
exactly
like squid sort of octopus creatures, you get so many of these origin stories of these monsters coming from the ocean. And, one very practical 3D argument that can be made is that so much of the ocean is unexplored, untapped, and you deal with Antarctica, which a lot of it is off limits and unexplored, and then you obviously have got the ice, and you're dealing with like potentially prehistoric things that still exist to this day that are undiscovered, unscientifically identified. It's really fun to theorize on what these things are and where they come from. So I'm a big fan of like the Monster of the Week idea. That was my initial response.
It's crazy. One thing, I'm just looking over some of my notes here too, is they said that on their initial dive so what makes this thing very interesting is not only the fact that it's an unknown species of squid or octopus, but like I said before, the reach of its toxin and venom is quite startling. 150 feet is huge. I mean, it hits within seconds, apparently, from the time it releases it. It instantly nails you. Now, the second scientist that was killed, this is very interesting. They said it first disabled their radio communication. Now, they thought that this was just by mistake, but they later learned that this creature was extremely, extremely intelligent. And
right.
Though it had not encountered, or so it's thought, has not encountered human beings or other intelligent life other than the creatures around it in millions of years, it instantly disabled their radio communication with one another immobilized one of the scientists and killed him. And then I don't know if it was the same day or it was a second dive. I'm not sure what exactly happened. That's a little bit foggy in my research that I looked at. But needless to say, that it came down to 7 scientists. One of those 7 was killed. Now, here's the part that I left out of my story and I wanted to jump back to because this is very impressive. Octopus, or certain species of octopus, are known to be master chameleons. They can blend in with their background and not be seen, and it's very impressive. If you ever watch National Geographic videos, they'll move from one surface to another and instantly change to that camouflaged color. This was beyond anything that they've ever seen from a species of creature, because not only did it take on the color and background, it could mimic the look of other animals. And what happened is, while they were swimming around in this darkness, it took on the form of a human being scuba diver. Mm-hmm. And they seen it coming towards them, and they thought each individually that it was one of the other divers. So, I mean, you're swimming in darkness, and you see someone to your left, and you look to your right, and then you see someone in front of you. You think it's just one of the 7 of you. So they kept swimming towards it, and it was the squid-like creature who then killed the second one, and then changed back into octopus form. So now you were talking about color scheme ability, shape-shifting ability, high intelligence, very large, fast, and very deadly. It almost sounds beyond a normal animal. Now, you have to say, if something's trapped under ice for millions of years, its evolution would be very different than that of something on the surface or poisoned by all of our toxins of human filth. We think of evolution from what we've seen from our viewpoint, but that is also evolution of animals who have been poisoned by us, and maybe that has slowed down their actual progression that they would have taken, whereas these have been untapped, full potential. So it could just be something very, very evolved, or it sounds to me very alienistic. To have this level of intelligence and shape-shifting ability, it almost sounds like it's not from this planet.
Right. Right. Now, we know that the characteristics of octopus can change colors. They can adapt to their environments. They can almost, not in a sense, shapeshift, but they're like chameleons. This particular being sounds, it takes like that concept to the next level, almost otherworldly. And I have a couple 2-3 theories as to what I think this thing is and maybe where it came from, which, might shed a little bit of light on why it's capable of the things that it's capable of.
Yeah, please share with us. I'd love to hear it.
Okay, well, let's see here. I'll start with my first theory that is a little bit more grounded, but it might not totally line up with the time frame that we're dealing with here. So there are secret societies that work with technology that we know nothing about, things that are kept away from civilian knowledge. Now, when I say secret societies, we've talked in the past about the super soldier programs, which are basically ran by global companies and corporations that have bazillions and bazillions of dollars and have access to technology that we know nothing about. Now, earlier on, there were a lot of genetic experiments being done by the Germans and by Russia, which is funny that this is in Russia because there's another story I'm going to reference in Russia where what they'll do is within these, tech giants of secret societies, they'll do cloning, they'll do hybridization, they'll do genetic modification and gene splicing. And our medical science now tells us that that's not possible, that it doesn't take. But I think that it is very possible, but it's only practiced, privately, and we know nothing about it. Well, you go back to like the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, we know that both the Russians and the Germans were doing scientific experiments that involved gene splicing and hybridization. So when I say hybridization, I mean that we're taking genetic makeup from one species and we're crossbreeding it in a lab with other species to create like monstrosities, the type of stuff that you see in movies. So not only were they able to make hybrids and creatures, but they would also able to enhance pre-existing species, whether it was insect, aquatic, or canine, feline. All of that stuff is experimented on and hybridized behind closed doors. And so I also know that they were already weaponizing animals, were being used in genetic modifications to be enhanced and dangerous, far more dangerous than they are now, and even almost being able to be controlled. And one thing that would happen more often than you would want it to is these creatures that they would make in labs would actually get out. They, for whatever reason, would break out and be turned loose on our society and our very real 3D reality, and they'd get into the water, they'd get into the ocean, they'd get into tunnel networks, and oftentimes, they would go out and try to hunt them and kill them, but they could just never catch them. They would disappear, and then that's when you start getting like monster sightings of all kinds of creepy crawlies out there, because they could just be like a rogue genetic experiment that got out of some facility somewhere, and they just couldn't contain it. And then in that same token, I don't know what the agendas are behind this, but sometimes those genetic creations were actually released on purpose or deliberately turned loose on the wild to see how it would attack natural animal and marine life, or how it would behave, and then it was studied, and then they can go rogue at that point. And then sometimes these companies don't really care about civilians or people. They just kind of like move on to the next thing and let the thing let nature take its course. Now, that does happen. And there was another story about a sea creature that was found in a lake in Russia. And I think this was more so in like the 70s or 80s, that people were seeing sort of like a humanoid, like aquatic creature in this lake that was attacking people. And it was said that it could shapeshift, and that it had like sonic sound attacks that it would do to disorient people, and a bunch of people in this local town were reporting sightings of this sea creature that was in this giant lake. And I think that stories like that are what inspires like our television and our film, in terms of like the creature of the Black Lagoon. I think those things are probably, like, more often than not, extraterrestrial, like you said, or genetic experiments that just go rogue, and then civilians run into them. And that's where these stories come from. So come on, how many movies do we have of the Germans and the Russians doing genetic experiments that go wrong and the creature gets out and is turned loose? I mean, those things, I think we have stories like that to sort of like a type of disclosure, to sort of like tell people that these things are happening. So that's just one of my theories. Now, that theory doesn't actually line up with the where this creature was found and how old it may be, and being so deep under the ice in an area that was probably unexplored up until this point. It's less likely that it was a genetic experiment based on where it was found and how old it probably is. But that is something that I wanted to sort of put out there and turn people onto the idea that those things do happen. Genetic experiments happen all the time and are released or break out of their containment, and then people do run into them. That's a thing.
Oh, it definitely is a thing. I mean, even the cloning years ago. Remember, they were trying to clone, and then they finally had done it, and they finally cloned a living animal, and it worked.
Yeah.
And think of, that's only what they've told us. How far they've come beyond that from cloning, or already were, and they're just leaking us old news. And obviously that is something that they're willing to share. There's so much that they are not. I mean, if they're able to clone an animal from another animal, what other type of things are they trying to do? We've already heard them trying to take DNA from creatures that no longer existed prehistorically and seeing if they could try to create them again. So if they're doing things like that, it's not a far reach to think, well, what if we splice a little bit of this DNA and that RNA with this DNA, and let's create something new. Let's create a raptor that can fly and spit venom. It's hard to say behind closed doors in these facilities. And folks, there are a lot of governmental facilities, not only here in our country, but across the world, both above and underground, that are top secret, that you only can get to with very, very high clearances. And even then, it's very, very few people make it to that level. And a lot of them are scientists, and usually a lot of them end up dying after the work's complete. So it's interesting that, as Dan said, there could be creatures out there like 46B, that are created, handmade, man-made, and set upon the world, or forgotten about, or escaped, and they get into the waterways, and then who knows what happens to them. But as Dan said also, with this specific one, it's interesting because they weren't sure what they were going to encounter when they finally broke through the bottom of the ice. They named a machine in the research that I did, and I don't know the technical term for it, but they were able to take a sample of the water and then find out how many organisms, both DNA and RNA, were in this sample of water, and then splice it to how many different organisms there would be in this water, plant and animal. And that's where they came up with the 3,500, and they were shocked at that because they didn't know if they would come across anything, and then they're realizing they're dealing with 3,500. And then they came down, and one of the first things they encountered was this thing. Now, from the way that the story goes, we don't even know what else is down there. Whether it's truthful that they took this creature and then plugged the hole and then it was over, or they've continued to research and just made everybody believe that it's no longer being researched. I mean, you're talking one of the very first things they came across. Well, what the hell else is down there?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And just to sort of add one little bit that I feel is important with this particular idea is that it's said that we have technology that is upwards to 100 to 200 years beyond what our civilians have access to in the public. Who knows what they can do in terms of genetics and DNA and RNA behind closed doors with an unlimited budget. And I do know for a fact that there are many bases which are called DUMBs that exist underneath the ocean, like the Earth's floor and the ocean and tunnel systems. Not just like, everybody knows about like Area 51, but that's like the most civilian, like public level concept of like a hidden base that we know nothing about. There are so many more of those types of bases underground and inside the ocean that it would probably be almost impossible to accept if you could see what they looked like on a picture or a video and what exists out there that we know nothing about, with technology that's 100 to 200 years beyond what civilians have access to. So if you take that concept and apply it to, creatures that could be created, the possibilities are endless.
Well, I think that Area 51, as amazing as it is, and everyone wants to know what exactly is going on there, as Dan said, folks, I think that was kind of given to us as a false flag. I'm not saying that I don't believe that there isn't top secret stuff there. I think there certainly is, but I think that's like a sprinkle on the cake, and everybody believes that's the cake. They're like, oh, we need to know what they're doing in Area 51. Meanwhile, they gave that to us as a freebie that distracts us. It's got us focused on let's raid Area 51 and breach it. Meanwhile, they would have fucking shot every one of you, and never got even close. And that is nothing, because the real bases that the top secret things are happening on are below your feet in mountain cave systems. They're below the Earth's surface, or they are underwater bases. And yes, folks, there are actual underwater bases.
Facts.
So things are happening that you will never hear about, because the people that work there pretty much, I would go as far as saying, I don't think they probably leave that base. Like that is their life. They stay the rest of their life in that base. You hit that high of a clearance, that is who you are until the day you die.
And yeah, absolutely. And these employees that work there, they're not like your brother or your sister or Jimmy that you went to school with. These are people that are probably born and trained to work within these systems that we will probably know nothing about ever.
I think that goes back to like our secret space program and super soldiers is they were raised to be, employees of this thing, and they are trained to, you don't have a life. They're not out there dating folks. They're not on farmersonly.com. I just want to throw that out there because that's the funniest site ever. But they're not on these sites. They live, breathe, and operate for this work specifically, and that's why you don't hear about it.
Right. So I love talking about this subject, and I love getting it out there any way we can. And if anyone's interested in learning more, you can go to our Super Soldier episode from Season 1 where we explore on that. And I would like to get one of these Super Soldier assets on the show as a guest in the future, and they might be able to shed some more light on how these bases work, where they operate out of, some information on the technology they use. But, we're big advocates of this concept.
Absolutely, and it was a great episode on that one. So as Dan said, go back and check it out. Now, before I forget to mention, one of the other really shocking tidbits of information on this specific story on Organism 46B is that whenever that lady was swimming away from it to try to get it captured in the specimen tank, it did grab her with one of the 14 tentacles, and she was able to use a knife or axe-like weapon that she had with her. They did have some type of cutting tools, and she actually lopped off one of the 14 tentacles, and they were able to bring that up with them. Now, here's what's very interesting. According to their accounts, later that night, they had taken the creature. From what I'm reading and what I've researched, it sounds like they didn't care so much about that missing tentacle. They took away the creature, but the tentacle was still brought up to surface, thinking it's just a dead limb. Later that night, it actually had crawled independently of the octopus itself and attacked them again. Now, I know that sounds wild, and it very well could be fabricated. I don't know, but from the accounts that were said, that it actually grabbed a hold of this lady again at some point, whether it was, independently it got into a building or they were still just on the ice above of the hole when it got them. I don't know. But from what I researched, it actually grabbed a hold of her and tried to strangle her, and they had to wrestle it off, and it seemed to move independently and think independently of the actual body of the octopus. Now, a lot of these things that we're talking about with this subject come from one of the doctors or scientists there by the name of Dr. Anton Padalok, or Padolka. I think that's it, Padolka. What's interesting is they talk, is this a true story? Is this a hoax? And no one knows for sure because it is kind of top secret. No one had ever even really heard about it until accounts from this scientist started getting leaked after he defected from Russia, but they've never been able to locate him. So he either went very deep into hiding or they end up getting him and he's probably no longer with us. One or the other, but he went out after defecting from Russia and just started spreading the news of this story of what he was a part of and what happened, because you got to think doctors a lot of times care about the actual, or scientists rather, care about their research. To drill for 30 years, and I'm sure it was probably even before he was working on it, but for 30 years of drilling to breach this massive untouched lake, one of the biggest finds in history, and then to come across this creature that can shape itself like a human being and is so quick and so deadly, and that's only the tip of the iceberg. Pun again. The only tip of the iceberg, and then that creature to be taken from you, to not even be able to research it, them to plug up the hole that you've worked so hard on, and then pretty much boot you off of the research. I'm sure that would make you feel a certain type of way, especially covering it all up and covering up the death of two of your friends. So he's never been located, and that's why they say, is it a hoax? Is it real? I believe that these things could be very real because of the fact that if you start to look, and we'll be talking about this coming up with one of our guests, David Weiss, flat earth theory, you start to look into Antarctica being much more than we're led to believe that it is.
Right.
And it starts to talk about how if you travel far enough across the ice that there is another ocean that we don't know about, which leads to other continents that we don't know about, which leads to a vast abundance of many precious caches of metals and different, natural gases and things that are there, as well as creatures. And this was actually said by someone very reputable in the early 1900s by Admiral Byrd, who was one of the youngest and most decorated admirals of the U.S. military, who had said on TV that he traveled to Antarctica on these crusades and was mind blown whenever he traveled far enough across the ice on this expedition that he met beings of what seemed like another world, and they talked and they had conversations and they showed them their country. And when he said this, and you can actually look this up on YouTube, this is real, they all looked at each other on the TV show like, he didn't just say that, did he? And they cut, and that footage disappeared for a long time and only to resurface because things can't really stay hidden forever.
I've seen it.
But yeah, he said this. So when you start to think about, okay, there's other continents and countries and life forms and abundances of natural resources under the ground, what the fuck else is there down there? I mean, especially in a lake that hasn't been touched in 100 million years. So, I mean, it's not a stretch to believe that maybe this isn't an alienistic being or a scientifically created being. Maybe this just is natural evolution of creatures, as I said before, untapped and untouched.
Right.
That just naturally progressing. And it's fascinating to me that what else is under there. I want to take a swim down there.
And that leads me into my second theory. So I had two theories on what this creature is and where it originates. And this is a perfect tie-in to that idea. So sidestep, I just want to say that I believe that a lot of disclosure happens through TV shows and movies and comic books and graphic novels and books. It's a place where the truth comes out and is depicted as fiction. Now, if any of you have ever seen the latest King Kong and the Godzilla films, they both totally just flat out talk about Antarctica bases. And even the old Superman movie by Zack Snyder, the original Man of Steel, that's all about Antarctica bases and things like that. And so it's all right there, for us to investigate. So on the topic of maybe this creature possibly being maybe an organic creation, that just evolved over time, well, I wanted to talk about sort of like the lore behind sort of the Godzilla and King Kong, the Skull Island idea. To reference the film again, spoiler alert, we get to go to King Kong's sort of like origin, his homeland, which he goes through the earth, basically in almost what I would perceive as like a portal. And I believe that there are vortices or vortexes underneath the in-tunnel systems in mountains and also underneath the ocean that almost take you to parallel realities or like alternate versions of Earth that might even be in different time periods, and we're dealing with nonlinear time here in quantum physics. But I know for a fact that in a previous episode we talked heavily about all kinds of mythological creatures that originate from the ocean, one of those being mermaids. So to tie back into that same narrative, what if the creature like this, who seems very organic, it seems less like a genetic experiment and more like something that maybe evolved through time organically, maybe even it's prehistoric in a sense, or maybe it comes from a parallel reality or a portal from another land where like these creatures like the King Kongs and the Godzillas and all of the other dinosaurs and giant creatures that come from that land sort of come through these portal systems and they sort of leak into our reality under the ocean through these vortexes. What do you think about that?
I resonate with that heavily because, through different topics that we've discussed, through different things that I've watched, read, and researched, I mean, even coming to mind is a show that you put me on that I think you got turned on to by Lauren, which was the Hellier.
Yes.
They start to talk about these goblin-like creatures, and they start to talk about the fact that they came from the mountainy areas and they can't seem to find them, but the heavy belief that they came out of some sort of tunnel system in the mountain. And this is not unheard of when you start to research more and more into all kinds of cryptids and unknown creatures, whether it be, Bigfoot or if you want to talk about the Boggy Creek monster, which is almost like another Bigfoot type of creature, dogmen, all these different things. There's a lot of accounts of them being in mountainy areas where there's cavern systems that they believe are there, but they can't seem to find them. We've had an episode on some of these things before, folks, as well as what Dan mentioned, which was mermen or merwomen, mermaids. And it sounds so ridiculous, but at the same time, one of the things that blows my mind is we have been above the surface here on Earth for how many millions of years, and, we're still discovering all of these species of whales and dolphins and fish and creatures in the ocean that we don't know about, and we still have so much of the ocean itself that we haven't even begun to touch. They still find places in Papua New Guinea. A few years back, they found a giant cavern system that had thousands of species of bats and rodents and things that they've never seen before, and it was open to the world. It just was far down into a cavern that you could look down into. There's a lot of pockets of places that are undisturbed. If all these things can exist easily accessible, then how, unfathomable is it of places under ice like this, or other, tunnel systems. So as you start to go down there, there very well could be a traveling system that we're just unaware of, a technology that we don't quite understand. And this isn't far-fetched, because as you look into history, there was talks on many occasions in different books and things of technologies that we don't understand. I talked before about the shamir. The shamir was something used in magical grimoires of King Solomon, where he talked about a worm that cut through any type of stone, and we mentioned this on another episode. It had been mentioned several times back then, but yet no one never figured out what the hell they were talking about. There's a lot of different things like that. Now, I want to give you kind of a comparison here. Look at a video game. Every level of the video game is made on the same exact platform. It's all the same construct. It's just they're programming it with different looks and parts to the levels. But it's all still the same platform. So as Dan said, it's all Earth. But when you go down there and go through one of these vortexes, it transforms you to a different level of the same platform, a different area. It breaks the bounds of our understanding of reality, but our understanding of anything is so incredibly small. We only use 10% of our brain, and what does the other 90 have that it could tap into? And then even beyond that, there's so much more beyond a human comprehension that we can't understand because of the limitations of our own programming. So it's very understandable that there's ways of traveling to other parts of this Earth, because we don't know how big this Earth is. You go into these tunnel systems that take you to another, an Earth that's as big as what we think this Earth is, a whole nother section that big. We don't know. One of the things I wanted to throw out there was, what if we're being lied to on the fact of how big this body of water is? They say it's one of the biggest, lakes on Earth, and it's under ice. And then they say it's actually not very deep. That's one of the things I found interesting, is they said it's actually not that deep of a lake. It's just very wide and long. And then as you get to the bottom, the sediment at the bottom is actually very, very deep. I mean, you're talking hundreds and hundreds of feet of sediment. But what if this glacial lake actually is more than they're saying, and this is an underwater city or a vortex system of some sort? And the story's been kind of fabricated to hide that, or this octopus creature really is just something guarding that, something that's in the waters to kill off anybody that ever would get down there. That if you go further down and dig further in, there's much more to discover. But I mean, the only creature they really came into contact with was this deadly. I'm sure there's shit that would have made this thing look like nothing. And these things could simply be, as Dan said, I'm mixing all of our ideas, a genetically formed animal made from higher intelligences than us, put into the water to safeguard their area, their territory down there, alienistic creatures that very well could be down there, and maybe they know that or maybe they don't because they never got that far, but they could be bioengineered, but not by humans.
I'm inclined to accept all of the above and resonate with pieces of everything that you've discussed. So very eloquently, by the way. I resonate with everything that you said. And I feel like we're close. I feel like we're close to whatever the answer is. It's got to be somewhere, maybe an amalgamation of what we discussed tonight about the thing. It's all very speculative, because I think that there are reasons that we are kept at the level of awareness as civilians that we are kept at, and I don't claim to understand what those reasons are, but I 100% subscribe to secret societies and very wealthy organizations that have access to almost insurmountable and unlimited volume of technology that we know nothing about. I also know that within our lore and our entertainment and our works of fiction, as long as novels have been being written, we have stories like The Journey to the Center of the Earth and Jules Verne and everything about people traveling into tunnel systems that almost take them through portals that lead them to entirely new lands. And so all of the above, I think, is true. And it's a matter of where we, resonate and hold our focus on. Whether or not we ever experience these things for ourselves, we don't know that yet. But I know that I really enjoy having these talks and, giving you guys something to ponder on.
Absolutely, and we want to thank you guys because this was a fan-picked discussion. This
Yes,
was one of the ones that you guys requested that you wanted to hear about. I knew about it, but I didn't know a whole lot about it. I certainly know now, more than I ever have, and that's great. I thank you for that because this is something that I'll ponder on for many years to come, and maybe we'll find more truth as time goes on. But thank you for the suggestion, folks. As we talked about earlier, please make sure you like the Celestial Oddities PairOfNormal Guys Facebook group page. Just search Celestial Oddities. You'll find it. You don't need to worry about typing all the rest of it. But jump in there, start discussions, join discussions. There's a lot of great things on there. It'll keep you in the loop as new things come. And as I always say, if you have any suggestions, any ideas of what you want to see us do or not do differently, anything like that, please drop us a message on there, on our personal Facebooks, or celestialoddities@gmail.com. We are very friendly and approachable. We will make sure we answer each and every email and message. We love interacting with you guys and obviously brainstorming together, Daniel and I, talking about these wonderful topics. And hopefully you guys enjoyed what we had to bring you tonight.
Yeah, guys, thank you very much for listening and tuning in on this particular topic. And just to recap what Garrett said, I love the fan suggestions. And like you mentioned, this is a request from somebody else. So if you guys have any that you'd like us to hear talk about, the show is going, I think season 2 is going to be extended in length, and there will be a season 3. So we have plenty of space to sort of fit your ideas in. And thank you guys for, helping us have topics to explore and challenging our belief structures and challenging our knowledge and our ability to discern and research. It's a lot of fun.
It absolutely is. If you guys need anything, make sure you reach out to us. If not, then we will catch you in 2 weeks at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time right here on Celestial Oddities Radio. You guys have a wonderful evening. We'll see you next time.